I rise today on the traditional and unceded territories of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. I offer my sincere thanks to the nations whose land we are on and acknowledge the vital importance of humility and respect in reconciliation. As we begin this 45th Parliament, let us recommit ourselves to that work, not just in word, but in actions. Today, I rise to introduce Bill S-228, an act to amend the Criminal Code sterilization procedures. This is a reintroduction of a bill that is identical to what the Senate passed unanimously as the amended version of Bill S-250, and that was sent to the House of Commons in October 2024. Unfortunately, that bill died on the order paper when Parliament was prorogued. But the violence it seeks to prevent has not stopped, and our responsibility has not diminished. This bill addresses a practice that is both unconscionable and ongoing, the forced and coerced sterilization of women and marginalized persons in Canada. Bill S-228 seeks to make it explicitly clear in the Criminal Code that sterilizing someone without their consent constitutes aggravated assault under Section 268(1) of the Criminal Code. Section 268(1) of the Criminal Code states, quote, "Everyone commits an aggravated assault who wounds, maims, disfigures, or endangers the life of the complainant," unquote. My bill, S-228, adds for a greater certainty clause to Section 268, affirming that sterilization procedures falls under the acts that wound or maim. It defines a sterilization procedure as any intervention that permanently prevents reproduction, regardless of whether it is technically reversible. This offense is serious. It also carries a maximum penalty of 14 years in prison. Let me be clear. Forced sterilization is not a relic of the past. It is happening in Canada today. The first question I am always asked when people discover that I'm working on the topic of forced and coerced sterilization is, that isn't still happening. That was a long time ago, wasn't it? The answer is simple, no. It is happening today, and it's happening at this very moment. Women are being coerced or forced into sterilization, whether they are pregnant or have just given birth or are in another situation. Some of the underlying reasons will be explained today. Canada has had a long, painful history of eugenics, of using sterilization to control and limit certain populations. From 1928 to 1973, Alberta and British Columbia had sexual sterilization acts that disproportionately targeted Indigenous women. Over 4,700 sterilizations were carried out in Alberta alone. Indigenous women, once revered in their communities as the givers of life and the holders of cultural knowledge, were and are targeted because of colonial beliefs that devalues their bodies and autonomy. This oppression was justified through colonialism, paternalism, and racism, and it did not stop with the repeal of those laws. In 2017, I was commissioned by the Saskatoon Health Authority to provide an external review of their tubal ligation policies after several Indigenous women came forward and said that they were either forced or coerced into a tubal ligation after they gave birth by cesarean section. I co-authored a report with Dr. Judith Bartlett documenting forced and coerced sterilizations in Saskatoon, which, its publication, created a national awakening to the reality faced by Indigenous women. There are hundreds of stories, but one particularly dangerous example stands out for me. A woman told us that a doctor pressured her into signing a sterilization consent form by claiming her baby would be born with cerebral palsy if she didn't sign. As you may know, cerebral palsy is caused from a lack of oxygen at birth. Another was told she had no choice and gave consent while actively in labor. Others were told the baby they were about to deliver would be taken away by social services if they did not sign. Others were sterilized within hours of giving birth without being told the procedure was permanent. Others were simply sterilized without their knowledge. Louise Delisle, a 15-year-old black teenager in Nova Scotia, was given a partial hysterectomy without her or her guardian's consent when she gave birth. Dr. Josephine Itawa from the University of Ottawa testified that the issue of hysterectomy continually came up in her research interviews by 237 rural Nova Scotia Black women. These stories are horrifying, but they're not isolated. My office has counted at least 12,000 Indigenous women who were forcibly or coercively sterilized in Canada between 1971 and 2018. Across Canada, ongoing class action lawsuits continue to shed light on the scale and persistence of forced and coerced sterilization. These class actions represent hundreds of Indigenous women who were sterilized without consent. The fact that these lawsuits span multiple jurisdictions and remain unresolved underscores the national scope of this crisis. Survivors are seeking justice not only for their personal trauma, but also for the systemic failures that allowed this practice to continue unchecked. These cases are a stark legal and moral warning. Our healthcare and legal systems have not yet reckoned with the full weight of this violation, and until they do, the harm will continue. A particular heinous case that came to light involves Dr. Andrew Kataska, who removed the ovaries and fallopian tubes of a 37-year-old Inuk woman without consent. Dr. Kataska was the former clinical director of obstetrics at Stanton Territorial Hospital in Yellowknife. Dr. Kataska has served as president of the Northwest Territories Medical Association. He has years of practicing medicine as well as professorships at the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the University of Toronto, University of Manitoba, and at UBC School of Population and Public Health. He has published articles on caring for Indigenous patients and, surprisingly, informed consent and ethics. Dr. Kataska's patient had pelvic pain, and she consented to having her right ovary and fallopian tube removed if necessary. While she was in surgery, Dr. Kataska stated, "Let's see if I can find a reason to take the left one." And he did. He permanently sterilized her. A complaint was lodged with the Northwest Territories Department of Health and Social Services, and a virtual hearing was held. The Board of Inquiry held that he violated the Canadian Medical Association Code of Ethics and Responsibilities. He was suspended for 5 months. His contract expired, so he had already served that, and he had to pay $20,000 for the legal costs of the hearing, and he had to take an ethics course. He and the Northwest Territories Health Authority are being sued for $6.5 million, and I have heard he is now working in Interior BC. He is registered with the Society of Physicians and Surgeons of BC. The bill I bring you today may have stopped this from happening. Dr. Kataska may have had that sober second thought before he sliced her remaining fallopian tube. He may have thought twice about the possible penalties in Bill S-228. Bill S-228 may have acted as a deterrent. I have been working diligently, at least since 2017, to eradicate forced and coerced sterilization, and early on I was directed by survivors of this horrific practice to create a law that would criminalize sterilization without consent. I was initially reluctant because of the harms that have historically affected Indigenous people within the criminal justice system. But I did introduce Bill S-250 after the 2 studies conducted by the Standing Senate Committee on Human Rights in 2021 and 2022. The first study brought together the disability community, the intersex community, the Black women from Nova Scotia, lawyers, and the government. From that study, we understood how deep the problems go. The second study, in which we heard directly from survivors of forced sterilization, was one of the most powerful, moving, and heart-wrenching experiences of my time in the Senate. During this study, the survivors were clear and spoke with a unified voice, asking that this horrific practice be criminalized. This bill is a direct response to their calls for action. This bill is also a response to Recommendation 1 from the Senate Standing Committee on Human Rights, The Scars That We Carry, Forced and Coerced Sterilization of Persons in Canada, Part 2. It states that legislation be introduced to add a specific offence to the Criminal Code prohibiting forced and coerced sterilization. I introduced Bill S-250 in June 2022, and the Standing Senate Committee on Legal and Constitutional Affairs conducted a comprehensive and deeply moving study. Witnesses included Nicole Rabbit, a survivor and board member of the Survivors Circle for Reproductive Justice, who told us that she, her mother, and her niece were all sterilized against their will. We heard from representatives from the Canadian Medical Association, Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, National Council of Indigenous Midwives, and Native Women's Association of Canada, all of whom supported the bill's objectives. Experts from the Department of Justice and Indigenous Services Canada who confirmed the bill's clarity and necessity. My office also received countless emails and telephone calls supporting this bill. During the committee study, there were some concerns raised about unintended consequences and the complexity of Bill S-250. And after hearing concerns about the complexity from departmental experts and my colleagues and listening very carefully, I worked collaboratively with the Minister of Justice to amend the bill and streamline it from 55 lines to 14 lines, making its intent crystal clear and removing any chance of unintended consequences. The amendment and the subsequent bill was quickly unanimously adopted by committee and by the Senate chamber before it was sent to the House for further study in October 2024. Bill S-228 is the amended version and is now before you. Colleagues, I cannot overstate this. We must act now. Every day that passes without this bill becoming law is another day someone may be sterilized against their will. This is not theoretical. It's not historical. This is happening. The last forced and coerced sterilization I was consulted on was in December 2024. Just recently, many of you will have seen the in-depth feature CBC News North did on the issue of forced and coerced sterilization, focusing on the story of Katie Bear, a First Nations woman who had previously been sterilized without consent. Every time I am speaking on this issue, I have told the story of the pervasiveness of sterilization and about a young woman I met while checking into a hotel late at night in Saskatoon. The clerk was alone and the lobby was empty. She asked me if I was the Senator of Sterilization. I explained that it's an area that I work in. She looked at me with her eyes filling with tears and said, "They did it to me when I was 21. I am now 35 and my children are grown. I can't afford in vitro fertilization and I want more children. I have a new partner." I got completely choked up and I had many tears too, and I said I would do what I could to help her. Now, just a few years after that chance encounter, CBC News North tells her incredible story in March 2025. She is now 41 years old and due to deliver in 2 weeks when I met up with her again. She underwent a tubal reanastomosis after a surprise ectopic pregnancy forced the removal of one of her fallopian tubes. She had less than a 5% chance of conceiving, but she did conceive. On March 20th of this year, she was nearly full term to deliver, and being an experienced mother of 4, felt that there was something wrong and went to the hospital in Saskatoon and was immediately admitted to the emergency maternal trauma room. This was the same hospital she was sterilized in 20 years before. The doctor that attended to her had her file, which showed what she had been through so many years before and what she went through to get pregnant. The doctor examined her and told her the baby was breech and it had to be turned or a C-section was imminent. The doctor at that point, in the emergency room, then asked her if she wanted to be sterilized while they were doing her C-section. This doctor was not just a doctor. This was also a professor of medicine at the University of Saskatchewan, responsible for educating and training our future doctors. This wasn't just an inappropriate question. It was a re-traumatizing moment that reflected the deep systemic issues we have yet to confront. For someone like Katie, whose ability to carry a child had already been taken from her once, to be questioned at such a vulnerable time or asked to give consent was a chilling reminder that the attitudes and assumptions behind forced sterilization are still present in our healthcare system today. This occurred on March 20th, 2025, 82 days ago. What this tells me is that the forced and coerced sterilization is not simply going away and more must be done. 2 days later, Katie gave birth via cesarean section by her own trusted doctor and gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Her name is Sage, meaning good medicine. It is already extremely difficult for Indigenous women and other marginalized people to access culturally safe reproductive care. And when they do, they are still being told, coerced, threatened, or deceived into giving up their reproductive futures. We can't stand by. This is not a new conversation. The groundwork has been laid, the evidence is clear, and the survivors are waiting. Let's not ask them to wait any longer. I want to thank the hundreds of survivors who've entrusted me with their stories. I especially want to thank Tracy Banab, Brenda Palche, Nicole Rabbit, and Katie Bear, and the many others whose voices have shaped this bill. You have already changed the national conversation. Now with Bill S-228, we can change the law. Let us ensure that no woman, no person is ever again robbed of their ability to decide if and when to have children. This is not just about criminal law, it's about human dignity. It's about justice. It's about our shared responsibility to ensure that our systems protect, not harm, the most vulnerable among us. I respectfully urge my colleagues to refer this bill to committee without delay, and I call on the Standing Senate Committee on Legal and Constitutional Affairs to study this bill quickly and efficiently, building upon the extensive record already established. During the last Parliament, the committee did significant and important work on this bill, shaping it alongside survivors to what stands before us here in the Senate today. It's imperative that their work does not go to waste. I urge the committee to consider the work that has previously been done, review the past reports, and usher this bill through committee in this Parliament with haste. Let us act decisively. Let us act now. Let us be on the right side of history. Miigwech, merci. Thank you. All my relations.